Commander Elena Vasquez stared at the message that had just arrived at Kepler Station. The words on her screen made no sense. The scout ship Phoenix had been missing for 6 months. Everyone assumed it was destroyed in some accident at the edge of known space. Ships went missing out there sometimes. Space was vast and dangerous, but now Phoenix was sending a signal. A weak, broken transmission that barely made it through the void. Elena read the message again, hoping she had made a mistake. They're not extinct. We were wrong about everything. Coordinates follow. Don't trust anyone who's been to the dark sites. The silence is coming home. Elena felt cold despite the warm air in her office. She had been running Kepler Station for 5 years. It was humanity's farthest outpost, built to watch the edge of charted space and study the ruins left behind by the architects. The architects were an ancient race that had vanished long ago, leaving only empty cities and strange technology scattered across dead worlds. The Galactic Council praised humans for their work studying these ruins. Other alien races found the architect sites disturbing and avoided them. But humans seemed comfortable poking around in the remains of dead civilizations. Elena had always been proud of that. Humans were brave enough to learn from the past while others were too scared. The coordinates in the message pointed to a system that wasn't on any star chart. It was in the deep void between known stars, where nothing should exist. Elena called up the long-range scanners and pointed them toward those coordinates. What she saw made her hands shake. There was something there. A faint energy signature that matched no known technology. Well, almost no known technology. The patterns looked familiar in a way that made Elena's stomach twist. She had seen similar readings before in the classified reports from architect dig sites, but that was impossible. The architects had been dead for thousands of years. Everyone knew that. Elena gathered her best team. Dr. Marcus Webb, her science officer, was brilliant at reading energy patterns. Security Chief Sarah Chen had experience with dangerous salvage operations. Engineer Tommy Rodriguez could fix or figure out almost any piece of technology in the galaxy. These 3 people she trusted completely. "We're taking the research ship Horizon to investigate a distress signal," Elena told them in the briefing room. She decided not to mention the strange message yet. "A ship went missing 6 months ago. We might have found where it ended up." The journey to the coordinates took 2 days. Elena spent most of that time staring at the scanner displays and trying not to think about the message. The words kept running through her mind. They're not extinct. Who wasn't extinct? The architects? That was crazy. Don't trust anyone who's been to the dark sites. Elena had been to dozens of architect sites. Did that mean she couldn't trust herself? When they reached the coordinates, they found Phoenix drifting in empty space. The ship looked intact from the outside, but it wasn't responding to any signals. Its engines were cold. Its communication array was dark. But life support was still running, and the scanners showed 5 life signs aboard. "How is that possible?" Dr. Webb asked. "They've been missing for 6 months. Their supplies would have run out weeks ago." Elena had no answer. They docked with Phoenix and prepared to board. Security Chief Chen insisted on going first, her hand never leaving her weapon. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. The inside of Phoenix was wrong. Elena felt it the moment she stepped aboard. The air was too still. The lights were too dim. Everything looked normal, but it felt like walking into a tomb. They found the crew in the main corridor. All 5 of them were sitting against the walls, their eyes open and staring at nothing. They were breathing. Their hearts were beating. But they didn't respond to anything. Elena waved her hand in front of Captain Morrison's face. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just sat there looking at something nobody else could see. "What happened to them?" Tommy asked in a whisper. Dr. Webb ran his medical scanner over the crew. "Their bodies are fine. Perfect health, actually. But their brain activity is strange. It's like they're dreaming, but they're awake. Deep, complex patterns I've never seen before." Elena felt that cold feeling again. She had heard stories about architect sites that did strange things to people's minds. Sites where exploration teams would go in normal and come out changed. Those stories were always classified, always hushed up. The official reports never mentioned anything like that. Security Chief Chen found the ship's computer core and started downloading the data. "Captain, you need to see this," she called from the bridge. The Phoenix's logs told an impossible story. The ship had followed a strange energy reading to an uncharted system. What they found there changed everything Elena thought she knew about the galaxy. The system contained 3 dead planets orbiting a dying star. But the planets weren't empty. They were covered with architect cities, just like the ruins humans studied everywhere else. Except these cities weren't ruins. They were full of life. The architects weren't extinct. They were hiding. Captain Morrison's final log entry was barely coherent. His voice shook as he described beings of pure energy, living in the shadows of their own cities. Creatures that had fled from something they called the Silence thousands of years ago. The architects weren't the galaxy's first great civilization. They were refugees. The Silence consumed everything, Morrison whispered in the recording. Entire species, entire worlds. It ate their thoughts, their memories, their souls. The architects ran to the edge of space to escape it. They've been hiding here ever since. The recording crackled with static. Morrison's voice became strange, distant. But it followed them. It's been growing stronger. And now it knows about us. It knows about humanity. It's coming for the core worlds. That was where the log ended. Elena stared at the blank screen, trying to process what she had heard. If this was true, everything humans thought they knew about the galaxy was a lie. The architect ruins weren't the remains of a dead civilization. They were camouflage, hiding places for survivors of something much worse. Dr. Webb found more data in the ship's sensors, energy readings that shouldn't exist, scan results showing technology that was impossibly advanced, and something else. Something that made Elena's blood freeze. The energy signatures weren't just from the hidden architect city. They were from inside Phoenix itself, from inside the crew. Captain, Dr. Webb said quietly, I don't think these people are alone in their own heads anymore. Elena looked back at the 5 crew members sitting motionless in the corridor. Their eyes were still open, still staring at nothing. But now she wondered what they were seeing, and whether they were still the same people who had left on this mission 6 months ago. The return journey to Kepler Station felt like the longest 2 days of Elena's life. Phoenix was towed behind them, its crew still locked in their strange trance. Elena couldn't stop thinking about the message that had started all this. Don't trust anyone who's been to the dark sites. She had been to the dark sites. So had half her crew back at the station. So had thousands of humans across the galaxy, all studying architect ruins and thinking they were doing important scientific work. What if they had all been changed? What if the thing Morrison called the Silence had been preparing for this moment for years? What if humanity's greatest strength, their willingness to explore dangerous places, had become their greatest weakness? Elena stared out at the stars and wondered how many secrets they were hiding, and how many of those secrets were already inside human minds waiting for the right moment to wake up. Elena couldn't sleep when they returned to Kepler Station. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blank stares of Phoenix's crew. She kept thinking about Dr. Webb's words. The crew wasn't alone in their heads anymore. Something else was in there with them. She made her way to her office in the middle of the station's night cycle. The corridors were empty and quiet. Too quiet. Elena found herself listening for sounds that shouldn't be there. Whispers. Footsteps that didn't belong to anyone. She was being paranoid. But after what they had found, paranoia felt reasonable. Elena's personal computer had files that most people never saw. Command-level clearance gave her access to reports that were buried deep in military databases. She had never looked at them before. There had never been a reason. Now she couldn't think of anything else. She started with the oldest files. Reports from humanity's first deep space explorations 200 years ago. The official history said humans had discovered their first architect ruins by accident. A survey ship had found strange structures on a dead world and called for scientific teams to investigate. But the classified files told a different story. Humanity's first contact with alien intelligence hadn't been with the Galactic Council. It had been with the architects themselves, and they hadn't been ruins. Captain Sarah Chen of the exploration ship Endeavour had been Elena's great-grandmother. Elena had grown up hearing stories about her, but never the whole truth. The real story was locked away in files marked with security levels that made Elena's hands shake as she read them. The Endeavour had been exploring a system at the very edge of what would become human space. They found a planet that should have been dead but wasn't. Cities of impossible architecture covered its surface, and in those cities lived beings of pure energy that could take physical form when they chose to. The architects were dying. Not from age or disease, but from running. They had been fleeing across the galaxy for thousands of years, always staying ahead of something they called the Silence. It wasn't a person or a race. It was something worse. A living idea that consumed consciousness itself. The silence fed on thoughts and memories. When it touched a mind, it didn't just kill the person. It absorbed everything they were and made it part of itself. Entire civilizations had vanished this way, their knowledge and culture becoming part of a growing hive mind that stretched across space. The architects had been the first to understand what the silence really was. They had tried to fight it, but how do you fight something that lives in minds? Every weapon they created, every strategy they developed, the silence learned and turned against them. So they ran. For thousands of years, they had been hiding at the edges of space, using their technology to create false ruins and dead cities. They let other races think they were extinct while they searched for a solution. They needed help, but every species they contacted eventually fell to the silence, except humans. Elena read her great-grandmother's reports with growing amazement and horror. The architects had been desperate when they contacted humanity. They were running out of places to hide. The silence was getting stronger, learning from every mind it consumed. Soon there would be nowhere left to run. But humans were different. When the architects tested human minds, they found something unexpected. Humans could hold two opposite ideas at the same time and believe both were true. They could know something terrible and then convince themselves it wasn't real. They could face horrible truths and still function normally. Other alien races were either too logical or too emotional. The logical ones couldn't accept contradictions in their thinking. When the silence invaded their minds, they either broke completely or were consumed instantly. The emotional ones were overwhelmed by the horror of what the silence represented and couldn't fight back effectively. But humans could do something impossible. They could know about the silence and forget about it at the same time. They could be partially infected and still remain themselves. This made them useless to the silence as a food source, but valuable as something else: prison guards. The architects had made a deal with early human governments. Humanity would help them contain the silence in exchange for technology and guidance. The plan was elegant and terrible. They would trap the silence in specially designed prison worlds scattered throughout space. These prisons had to be maintained by minds that could resist the silences, influence but still interact with it. Humans were perfect for the job. Elena found construction records for dozens of facilities, built in remote systems. Each one was designed to hold a fragment of the silence. The entity had been broken apart and scattered, its pieces locked away in places where few people would ever go. To the rest of the galaxy, these sites looked like archaeological digs where humans studied ancient ruins. The truth was that humans were studying something much more dangerous. Every research team sent to these sites included people who knew the real purpose of their mission. They maintained the prisons, monitored the containment systems, and made sure the silence stayed locked away. But the job came with a price. Extended exposure to the silence changed people. Not enough to consume them, but enough to create a connection. Many of the guards carried fragments of the silence in their own minds. These fragments were too small to take control, but they allowed the guards to understand and anticipate what the main entity might do. Elena realized she was reading about her own job. Kepler Station wasn't just an outpost for exploring space. It was a monitoring station, watching over one of the most important prisons in the containment network. Half the archaeological sites her team studied were actually prison worlds, and Elena herself had been to many of those sites. She had worked directly with containment systems without knowing what they really were. According to the files, that meant she was almost certainly carrying a fragment of the silence in her own mind. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange calm. Part of her mind was examining the idea logically, accepting it as fact. Another part was already working on ways to deny it, to convince herself it wasn't true. She could feel both reactions happening at the same time, and somehow that felt normal. Maybe that was proof enough. Elena kept reading. The files showed how the system had worked for 2 centuries. Humanity had taken on the burden of containing cosmic horror while pretending to be simple explorers. The Galactic Council never suspected. To them, humans were just another young race with an unusual interest in ancient history. But something had gone wrong recently. Several prison worlds had reported problems with their containment systems. Teams sent to investigate had returned changed, their behavior subtly different. And now Phoenix had found evidence that the silence was stronger than anyone had realized. The entity hadn't been passively sitting in its prisons. It had been learning, growing, using its fragments inside human minds to understand its captors. And now it was ready to escape. Elena found the most recent reports from the Architect command structure. Yes, they still existed, hidden in facilities disguised as human research stations. Their warnings were clear and desperate. The Silence had found a way to corrupt the prison systems from within. It was using the very humans who guarded it as tools to break free. The Phoenix crew wasn't just infected. They were pilots. The Silence was learning to drive human bodies like vehicles, keeping the original minds conscious but trapped inside their own heads. These puppet humans could pass any test, fool any scanner, and infiltrate any facility. The horror of it made Elena's stomach twist. How many people in the containment network had already been compromised? How many of her own crew were still themselves? She thought about the strange feeling she had experienced boarding Phoenix, the sense that something was wrong. Maybe her partially infected mind had recognized the presence of the Silence. Maybe that fragment everyone carried was useful for more than just maintaining prisons. Elena made a decision that would change everything. She was going to tell her crew the truth, all of it. If the Silence was breaking free, humanity would need to face it knowingly. The age of secret prison guards was ending. It was time for humanity to become something new, something that could fight a war against living nightmares while carrying pieces of those nightmares inside their own minds. Elena hoped humans were as stubborn and contradictory as the architects believed, because they were about to be tested in ways no species had ever survived. Elena called an emergency meeting with her senior staff. Dr. Webb, Security Chief Chen, and Engineer Rodriguez gathered in the secure briefing room, all looking tired and confused. They had been running tests on the Phoenix crew for 3 days with no answers. The 5 infected humans remained in their trance-like state, completely unresponsive to any treatment. "I need to tell you something that will sound impossible," Elena began. She had practiced this speech in her head dozens of times, but actually saying the words felt surreal. "Everything we think we know about our job here is wrong. We're not just studying ancient ruins. We're prison guards." She told them everything. The true history of First Contact. The real purpose of the Architect sites. The nature of the Silence and why humans were the only species that could contain it. Her team listened with expressions that shifted from disbelief to horror to grim acceptance. Dr. Webb was the first to speak. "That would explain the energy readings I've been seeing at dig sites. I always thought they were just residual power from old Architect technology. But if these are active containment systems, it explains why I always felt wrong at those places," Security Chief Chen added. "My instincts kept telling me something was dangerous, but I could never identify what." Engineer Rodriguez looked pale. "I've worked on maintenance systems at 12 different sites. You're telling me I've been infected with pieces of an alien consciousness?" "We all have," Elena said. "According to the files, anyone who spent significant time at the prison worlds carries fragments. It's not enough to control us, but it changes us, makes us better at our jobs." Dr. Webb ran his scanner over himself, then the others. The readings he got made him frown. "There's definitely something unusual in our neural patterns. Structures that shouldn't be there, but they're integrated so deeply, they might as well be part of our normal brain function." "So what does this mean for the Phoenix crew?" Chen asked. "Are they lost?" Elena had been dreading that question. "I don't know. The fragments they're carrying are much larger than ours, large enough to take control. But the original minds might still be in there somewhere." Before anyone could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the station. Elena's communicator crackled to life. "Commander, we have a situation in Medical Bay 7, came the voice of Dr. Martinez, one of her medical officers. "The Phoenix crew is awake." They rushed to the medical bay to find chaos. The 5 Phoenix crew members were standing in their containment cells, looking completely normal. They were talking, laughing, asking for food and updates on their families. If Elena hadn't seen them in their catatonic state, she would have thought they were perfectly fine. Captain Morrison smiled when he saw Elena approach. "Commander Vasquez, good to see you. I hear we've been out for a while. Some kind of accident with our navigation systems?" Elena felt cold. Morrison sounded exactly like himself. His mannerisms, his voice patterns, even his sense of humor were all correct. But something in his eyes was wrong. They were too bright, too focused. He was watching everything with an intensity that seemed almost hungry. "Captain Morrison," Elena said carefully, Do you remember what happened to your ship? Navigation failure, Morrison replied without hesitation. We were exploring the outer rim when our computer system started malfunctioning. Must have been some kind of energy field that scrambled our electronics. Good thing you found us. It was a perfect lie. Reasonable, believable, and completely false. Elena knew Morrison was describing events that had never happened. The real Morrison would remember finding the architect refugees and learning about the silence. This thing wearing Morrison's face was covering up the truth. Dr. Webb ran medical scans on all 5 crew members. Their bodies showed no signs of infection or trauma. Their brains appeared completely normal. If Elena hadn't read the classified files, she would have believed these were the same people who had left on the Phoenix mission 6 months ago. But she had learned to trust the part of her mind that carried the silence's fragment. That part was screaming warnings at her. These were not the same people. Something else was driving their bodies while their real minds were trapped somewhere inside. Elena made a decision that could endanger the entire station. She was going to test them. Captain Morrison, she said, I need you to verify your identity. Please tell me about your last conversation with Command before you departed. Morrison smiled. Of course. Admiral Harrison briefed us on our mission to survey system KX-47 for potential mining operations. Standard exploration protocol, another lie. Elena knew Morrison's real orders had been to investigate unusual energy readings that matched architect technology. Mining surveys were cover stories for containment missions. And what did you find at KX-47? Elena pressed. Nothing significant. Some interesting mineral deposits, but nothing worth developing. We were heading back when the navigation failure occurred. Elena nodded and pretended to accept his story, but she was already planning. If the silence could create perfect copies of human behavior, traditional security measures would be useless. She needed a different approach. Over the next several hours, Elena watched the Phoenix crew interact with her people. They were flawless in their performances. They knew personal details about their families, remembered shared experiences with other crew members, and displayed all the right emotional responses. But Elena's fragment-infected mind kept picking up subtle wrongness in their behavior. They were too interested in the station's computer systems. Too curious about personnel assignments and duty schedules. They asked innocent questions about other archaeological sites and seemed very interested in the answers. They were gathering intelligence. Elena realized the silence wasn't just trying to escape. It was preparing for something much larger. These puppet humans were scouts learning about humanity's defenses and weaknesses. The entity was planning to infiltrate the entire containment network. That night, Elena gathered her trusted team in her quarters. They swept for listening devices and activated privacy shields before talking. They're not human anymore, Elena said quietly. They're perfect copies, but something else is controlling them. What do we do? Dr. Webb asked. We can't just lock them up without evidence, and their medical scans show nothing wrong. We need to contact the architects, Elena decided. If this is happening here, it's probably happening at other sites too. The whole containment system might be compromised. Engineer Rodriguez looked skeptical. How do we contact beings made of energy who've been hiding from the galaxy for thousands of years? Elena had been wondering the same thing. But the classified files had mentioned emergency protocols, ways for human facility commanders to reach the architect command structure when containment failures occurred. She had never imagined she would need to use them. The communication system was hidden inside Kepler Station's main computer core. Elena accessed it using codes that were supposed to be destroyed after reading. The response came within minutes, transmitted on frequencies that shouldn't exist and using encryption that made her head hurt to look at. The architect message was simple and terrifying. Containment failure confirmed at multiple sites. The silence has learned to pilot human forms. Evacuation protocols initiated. Prepare for final confrontment. Elena stared at the message, trying to understand what final confrontment meant. Before she could ask for clarification, another alarm sounded. This one was different, a deep throbbing sound that Elena had never heard before. Commander, came a panicked voice over the communication system. We're detecting massive energy signatures approaching the station. Multiple ships using technology that doesn't match any known design. Elena rushed to the command center and saw something impossible on the main display. A fleet of ships was emerging from empty space, their hulls glowing with the same energy patterns she had seen at architect sites. But these weren't architect vessels. They were human ships, dozens of them. all showing signs of the silence's influence. The infection had spread much further than anyone realized. Phoenix hadn't been the first ship to fall under the silence's control. The entity had been quietly taking over human vessels for months, building its own fleet while hiding in plain sight. Elena realized this wasn't a rescue mission or an investigation. It was an invasion. The silence wasn't trying to escape its prisons anymore. It was coming to collect its human assets and begin its expansion into the populated galaxy. The war for humanity's mind was about to begin, and Elena wasn't sure which side had the advantage. The infected fleet surrounded Kepler Station within hours. Elena watched from the command center as dozens of human ships took positions around them. Each vessel should have contained allies, people she might have known or worked with. Instead, they were piloted by the silence wearing human faces. "Commander," Dr. Webb said quietly, "I'm reading life signs on those ships. Hundreds of humans. They're all alive." That made it worse somehow. The people on those ships weren't dead. They were trapped inside their own bodies, forced to watch as something else used their hands to threaten their friends. Elena wondered if they could still think, still feel horror at what they were being forced to do. "Incoming transmission," reported Communications Officer Taylor. Elena nodded for him to put it through. Captain Morrison's face appeared on the main screen. He was standing on the bridge of the Phoenix, looking perfectly normal and reasonable. "Commander Vasquez, we need to discuss the situation. I'm requesting permission to come aboard with a small diplomatic team." Elena almost laughed at the absurdity. The thing wearing Morrison's face was asking for permission to board while surrounded by an invasion fleet. It was still pretending to be human, still playing by human rules even as it prepared to destroy them. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Captain," Elena replied. "Our medical teams are still concerned about contamination from your ship's accident." Morrison's smile never wavered, but something flickered in his eyes. "Commander, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Our medical evaluations show no contamination. In fact, we'd like to help you investigate some unusual readings we detected in this system. More lies wrapped in truth." Elena was sure the silence had detected the hidden architect facilities near Kepler Station. It was using Morrison to gather information about humanity's real defensive capabilities. "We'll need time to consider your request," Elena said, then cut the transmission. Her team gathered around the command table, trying to look calm while an alien entity watched them through human eyes. Elena activated the room's highest-level privacy shields before speaking. "Report on our defenses," she ordered. Security Chief Chen looked grim. "We have standard defensive weapons, but nothing designed to fight other human ships. Our shields can hold for maybe an hour under concentrated fire." "What about evacuation?" Dr. Webb asked. "Where would we go?" Engineer Rodriguez pointed out. "Those ships have us surrounded. And even if we could escape, how many other stations are compromised? For all we know, the silence controls half the human settlements in this sector." Elena felt the weight of command crushing down on her. She was responsible for 60 people on this station, and she had no good options for keeping them safe. Fighting seemed hopeless. Surrender would mean becoming puppets like the Phoenix crew. That was when the architects arrived. The first sign was a change in local space itself. The stars seemed to bend and twist as something massive emerged from dimensions that human physics couldn't properly describe. Elena's instruments screamed warnings about impossible energy readings and gravitational distortions that should have torn the station apart. But instead of destruction, Elena felt a strange calm settling over her mind. The fragment of the silence she carried was responding to something, creating a bridge between her consciousness and the arriving architects. The architect's ship wasn't really a ship at all. It was a construct of pure energy held together by will and desperation. Through her mental connection, Elena could sense the beings inside it. There were only a few dozen left, the last survivors of a race that had once spanned the galaxy. Their leader communicated directly with Elena's mind, bypassing language entirely. The sensation was like having thoughts that weren't her own but somehow felt familiar. "Human Commander," the voice said without sound. "The final hour has come. The silence has grown beyond our ability to contain. It has learned to use your species' unique nature against you." Elena understood immediately. Humans could carry fragments of the silence without being consumed. But that same ability made them perfect hosts for larger infections. The entity had been patient, slowly increasing the size of fragments in key humans, until it could take control, while leaving the original minds functional enough to maintain the illusion of normalcy. How many are infected? Elena asked through the mental link. Unknown. The silence has been working for years to position its agents throughout your command structure. Your species' tendency toward compartmentalization allowed it to hide in plain sight. Elena felt sick. The very trait that made humans useful as prison guards had become their greatest vulnerability. People could know about the silence and forget about it. They could be partially infected and rationalize away the symptoms. They could work alongside infected colleagues without noticing the changes. What can we do? Elena asked. The architect's response came with images and emotions that human language couldn't properly convey. The entity showed Elena the true scope of what they were facing. The silence wasn't just trying to escape its prisons. It was preparing to transform humanity into a galaxy-spanning hive mind that would consume every other species. But humans had one advantage that even the silence hadn't fully understood. Their psychological flexibility worked both ways. If they could consciously accept the contradiction of carrying the silence while remaining themselves, they could use that contradiction as a weapon. You must choose, the architect explained. Accept full infection knowingly or resist and watch your species fall. There is no middle path remaining. Elena felt the choice like a physical weight. The architect was offering to remove the safeguards that kept human silence fragments small and controlled. Elena and her crew could voluntarily take on larger pieces of the entity, becoming consciously infected while somehow maintaining their humanity. It sounded insane. But the alternative was worse. What happens if we accept full infection? Elena asked. You become something new, neither fully human nor fully silence. A hybrid consciousness that can fight the entity on its own terms while retaining human will and creativity. Elena thought about the Phoenix crew, trapped inside their own minds while the silence used their bodies. Then she thought about her own crew, people who trusted her to find a way out of this situation. Finally, she thought about humanity itself, spread across hundreds of worlds with no idea that their minds were under attack. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Do it, Elena said. Infect us all. But we stay ourselves. The architect's response carried something like approval mixed with deep sadness. Your species continues to amaze us very well. Prepare your people for transformation. Elena gathered her crew and explained what was about to happen. She expected panic refusal, maybe mutiny. Instead, she got questions about the process and requests for more details about how the infection would work. Dr. Webb was fascinated by the medical implications. Security Chief Chen wanted to know if the infection would make them better fighters. Engineer Rodriguez asked if they would gain access to architect technology. It was such a human response that Elena almost laughed despite the situation. Faced with voluntary alien infection, her people were treating it like any other dangerous assignment that needed to be completed properly. One more thing, Elena announced. Once we do this, there's no going back. We'll be something new, something that's never existed before. Better than being puppets, Chen said simply. The transformation began immediately. Elena felt the silence fragment in her mind growing, expanding, becoming something larger and more complex. But instead of overwhelming her thoughts, it seemed to merge with them. She was still Elena Vasquez, but she was also something more. Through her expanded consciousness, she could sense her crew undergoing the same change. They remained themselves, but gained new capabilities. Enhanced pattern recognition, improved spatial awareness, the ability to sense silence-infected minds from great distances. Most importantly, they could now resist the silence's control while understanding how it worked. They had become immune to its influence while gaining the power to fight it directly. Elena opened her eyes and looked at her transformed crew. They looked exactly the same, but she could sense the dual nature of their thoughts, human creativity and stubbornness combined with alien knowledge and perspective. Outside, the infected fleet was beginning to move closer to the station. But Elena was no longer afraid. She and her crew had become something the silence had never encountered before. Willing hybrids who chose their infection instead of having it forced upon them. The real war was about to begin. Elena stood on the command deck of Kepler Station, but she was no longer just Elena. The infection had changed her in ways she was still discovering. She could feel the thoughts of her crew like whispers in the back of her mind. More importantly, she could sense the corrupted humans on the ships surrounding them. They were in pain. The silence was using their bodies like tools, keeping their minds aware but helpless. Elena could feel their silent screams across space. It made her angry in a way that was both human and something else entirely. "Commander," Dr. Webb said, his voice carrying new harmonics that hadn't been there before the transformation. "I'm reading massive energy buildups on the infected ships. They're preparing to fire." Elena smiled, and the expression felt strange on her face. Part of it was human determination. Part of it was something older and more alien. Let them try. They don't know what we've become. The first barrage of weapons fire lit up space around Kepler Station. Elena watched the energy beams approach and felt the station's shields respond in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The defensive systems were adapting in real time, learning from each attack and becoming stronger. Through her enhanced consciousness, Elena understood what was happening. The station's computer systems were interfacing with the hybrid minds of her crew. Human intuition was guiding architect technology to create defenses that neither species could have managed alone. "Return fire," Elena ordered. The weapons that emerged from Kepler Station weren't the standard defensive systems the station had carried yesterday. They were something new, created by hybrid minds that understood both human tactics and silence vulnerabilities. The energy beams that lanced out toward the infected fleet didn't just damage ships. They disrupted the silence's control over human minds. Elena watched through her enhanced senses as the first infected ship lost coordination. The silence fragment controlling it was suddenly cut off from its host, leaving confused but free humans at the controls. The ship's weapons went silent as its crew tried to understand what had happened to them. "It's working," Security Chief Chen reported. Her voice carried the same alien harmonics as the rest of the crew. "The liberation beams are freeing people from silence control." But the silence wasn't helpless. Elena felt it adapting to the new threat, changing its approach. Instead of trying to maintain control over individual ships, it began consolidating itself into fewer hosts with stronger connections. The remaining infected vessels suddenly moved with perfect coordination, attacking with inhuman precision. Elena realized this was what the final confrontation had always been building toward. Not a battle between species, but a conflict between different approaches to consciousness itself. The silence represented unity through consumption, absorbing all minds into a single vast intelligence. Humanity represented unity through cooperation, maintaining individual identity while working together. The hybrid consciousness Elena and her crew had become was something new. They shared thoughts and awareness without losing themselves. They could coordinate perfectly while still disagreeing with each other. It was everything the silence wanted to achieve, but accomplished through choice instead of force. "Commander," Engineer Rodriguez called out, "I'm detecting movement in the deep sectors. More ships are coming." Elena extended her consciousness toward the approaching vessels and felt her heart sink. These weren't more infected human ships. They were silence constructs. Vessels grown from consumed matter and piloted by pure alien intelligence. The entity had been building its own fleet while hiding inside human minds. "How many?" Elena asked. "Hundreds, maybe thousands. They're emerging from systems we thought were empty." Elena understood. The silence had been using the prison worlds as construction sites, building a massive fleet while everyone thought it was safely contained. The corruption of the Phoenix crew hadn't been an escape attempt. It had been the signal to begin a full-scale invasion. Through the mental link with the architects, Elena felt their desperate hope. This hybrid approach was something they had never tried before. They had always seen the choice as fighting the silence or running from it. The idea of deliberately merging with it while maintaining free will was too dangerous and too alien for their logical minds to accept. But humans were used to holding contradictory ideas. They could be infected and free, alien and human, individual and collective all at the same time. "All stations," Elena announced over the ship's communication system. "This is Commander Vasquez. I'm about to send you information that will seem impossible. I need you to listen carefully and make a choice." She opened a channel to every human facility in the sector and began broadcasting the truth. All of it. The real history of human architect cooperation. The nature of the silence in the prison system. The corruption spreading through the human command structure. And finally, the option to voluntarily accept hybrid infection. The response was immediate and chaotic. Some facility commanders refused to believe her. Others demanded more evidence. A few simply cut the communication and prepared to fight, but many listened. Elena could sense their minds through the expanding network of hybrid consciousness, as they made the same choice she had. Across dozens of systems, humans were voluntarily accepting alien infection to gain the power to fight an alien threat. It was the most human response imaginable. When faced with impossible odds and terrible choices, they found a third option that nobody else had considered. The battle for the sector lasted 3 days. Elena lost track of individual engagements as her consciousness expanded to coordinate hybrid forces across multiple star systems. She was Elena Vasquez commanding Kepler Station, but she was also Dr. Sarah Kim, fighting to free infected crews in the Centauri system, and Captain James Park leading a hybrid fleet toward the Silence's main construction facility. The Silence fought with perfect coordination and ruthless efficiency. But the hybrids fought with human unpredictability guided by alien knowledge. Every time the Silence adapted to their tactics, the humans would do something completely illogical that worked anyway. The turning point came when engineer Rodriguez discovered how to reverse the Silence's constructs. Instead of just destroying the alien ships, the hybrids began converting them, turning the Silence's own technology against it. The entity that had spent millennia consuming other consciousnesses suddenly found itself being dismantled and absorbed by beings it had tried to control. Elena felt the Silence's shock and rage as its perfect plan collapsed. The entity had assumed that partial infection would make humans easier to control completely. Instead, it had given them the knowledge they needed to fight back effectively, but the victory came with a cost. Elena and her crew were no longer entirely human. They would never be able to return to their old lives or pretend that the galaxy was a safe and simple place. They had become something new, something that other humans might fear or reject. "Commander," Dr. Webb said as the last Silence construct was converted, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth Command." Elena wasn't surprised. The battle had been visible across multiple systems. There was no way to hide what had happened or what they had become. Admiral Harrison's face appeared on the main screen. Elena had met him several times during her career. He looked older now, tired and confused. "Commander Vasquez," Harrison said carefully, "your reports are difficult to believe. We're going to need a full debriefing and medical evaluation of your crew." Elena smiled. Through her hybrid senses, she could feel the Admiral's fear and suspicion. He was looking at her as if she might be another infected puppet. In a way, she supposed she was. "Of course, Admiral," Elena replied. "But first, you should know that the Silence threat isn't over. We've won this battle, but there are other entities out there. Other cosmic horrors that the architects have been monitoring. If humanity wants to survive what's coming, we're going to need more volunteers." Harrison looked skeptical. "Volunteers for what?" "To become like us. To carry pieces of alien consciousness while remaining human. To be guards and soldiers and explorers in a galaxy that's much more dangerous than we ever imagined." Elena gestured toward the view screen, where converted Silence ships were already being retrofitted for human use. "We're offering humanity a choice, Admiral. Stay safe in the core worlds and hope that threats like the Silence never reach you. Or join us at the edge of known space and help us keep the galaxy's nightmares contained." The transmission ended with Harrison promising to contact her again after consulting with his superiors. Elena wasn't worried about the politics. She knew humans well enough to predict the outcome. Some would reject the hybrid option and demand that Elena and her crew be quarantined or destroyed. Others would volunteer immediately, eager for the chance to become something more than human. Most would argue about it for years while slowly accepting that the galaxy had changed and they needed to change with it. Elena looked out at the stars and felt the hybrid network expanding as more humans made the choice to accept alien infection. They were becoming humanity's first line of defense against cosmic horror. Guards who carried pieces of the things they guarded against. Soldiers who fought nightmares with weapons made from their own nightmares. At the edge of known space, humanity was learning to keep new kinds of secrets.